I signed up to introduce some thoughts about layers because I'm doing this San Francisco coloring book series, and right now I'm working on the Mission District coloring book. And of course, like anybody here who works in like any kind of visual art, right, you use layers, and right, that goes into like a lot of visual work. So that's like the easy answer for why I signed up for layers, and I'll get into the hard answer in a minute. But these are my drawings. This is something from the Mission District coloring book, and there were some other ones over there. It was super great to see everybody engage with the work and draw on my stuff. Thank you so much. It's really cool. And it's also very cool to have the drawings here at Frog Design. I've never been here before. I've never really spent a lot of time in this neighborhood. And when I come to a new place, Besides like doing whatever it is I'm doing in that new place, I'm also thinking like, where am I? Where am I culturally? Where am I geographically? And where am I in a larger historical context? I know that's kind of maybe too deep for 9 a.m., but we all had coffee, so we'll get there. But yeah, I am often asking this question of where am I? So to prepare for this talk, I did a little research about where we are right now here today at Frog Design. So this is a map of Eastern San Francisco from 1853. It looks a little different, right, than maps that we see of San Francisco. So it turns out we're in the Mission Bay neighborhood, right? This was Mission Bay, right? It was a body of water. Now it's land, right? This right here, this little blip, that's Mission Rock in 1853. So right now we're inside this C curve. And I think that's so interesting. So then I layered on some Google Maps onto this. And I was able to see nearly exactly where we are today here at Frog. So this was really interesting to me, right? So what happened, I guess, in my research, what I found was that around 1850, the gold rush, all these ships came onto the shore of eastern San Francisco over there, and some of them sank, some of them just stayed there. They threw a lot of trash out of their boats. There was all this debris from the gold rush, right? It was a really busy time. And then, so it got kind of filled in with like all this stuff. And then in 1906, there was a big earthquake in San Francisco. Most of downtown burned, and there was all this debris. So after that, that debris ended up in that C curve in Mission Bay, where we are right now. At the same time, industry and the government was making Mission Rock bigger by adding to it, right? So they just like grew it and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And then this just became a big thing, right? And then it just became land, and I'm sure people know more about it than I do, but developers probably had something to do with it, and now we are in a neighborhood called Mission Bay, right there. So I don't know about you, but when I look at these two maps together, it creates like a little bit of dissonance, right? I'm like, wait a minute, one thing is not like the other. There's more to this story. Why is this like that, right? It creates some conflict. And that's one of the themes I want to get into today is layers of conflict in spaces. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done in the past because it digs into this theme of conflict. So this is one of my earlier 2D works. As you can tell from this drawing, which I did many years ago, I have zero formal training in illustration, visual design, all of these things. I came up as an advertising copywriter in big ad agencies. And in those environments, if any of you have ever worked in them, I'm sure some of you have, your whole job, right, especially as a junior or mid-level person, is to come up with ideas, and you're doing that all day. And your brain is just full of all these ideas. And if you're lucky, maybe you sell one of those, one of your 1,000 ideas to a client. But that's not really always the case. And you want to do something with all these ideas that you have in your head. You want to see them through, right? It's such a shame when you feel like you have a good idea and you don't get to make it true. So it was in that environment that I came up with the idea for my first book, Apocalypse Cakes, Recipes for the End. It's a cookbook in homage to apocalyptic eventualities. such as the one in which blood rains down upon us from the heavens. It's totally ridiculous. Definitely, like, no ad agency was going to pay for this or was interested in this. Uh, so, basically the concept for the book is like, we take this nice thing, right? Making cakes, right? It's like this nice, quaint thing, right? It's like kind of feminized. It's like dainty. We're Martha Stewart making cakes, and you put it with apocalypse is the end of the world, right? So these two things are in conflict. And that was kind of like the concept of the book. And I kept going with it and used a lot of different kinds of apocalypses, whether you believe they're apocalypses or not, and created all kinds of books. All kinds of cakes for it. So for those of you too young to remember, there was a time when a certain idiotic Alaskan governor was one election and a funeral away from becoming president of the United States. So I had to make a cake about that. This is my President Palin Half-Baked Alaska. Super fun. And, some people think that we gays getting married is apocalyptic. So I had to make a gay wedding cake about that. Clearly, the end of civilization, right? Those are little he-men that I got from eBay. And their little masks are the tips of gardening gloves. I snipped them off and put them on their little faces. I go to their gym, by the way. I do. So you get the idea behind the book, right? It's like all manner of apocalyptic eventualities. Like you put something nice with something terrible, and then you get an apocalypse cakes. But back to the gays. My next book is called Gay Men Draw Vaginas. It's a collection of drawings by anyone who identified as a gay man. People from all over the world submitted drawings. Here's a little screenshot from our InstaVag account, which is still pumping along on the internet. My collaborator, Keith Wilson, who's a filmmaker, and we published a hardback book in 2014, and then we published this paperback and a coloring book, which are over there for sale, in 2018. So to get some of these drawings, we held these pop-up art making booths, and we asked people, hey, do you want to draw a vagina? So here, this is me at the intersection of Castro and Market, with all my markers and pens and stuff. And yeah, it turns out that people love to draw vaginas. Like, I don't get it. Here's one of the drawings from the book. It's one of my favorites. Here's another. This is by an engineer. So, you get it, right? Like the book is putting these two things together that some people think are in conflict with one another, right? It's an illusion, right? Gay men and vaginas. Oh my God, what's going to happen when you put those two things together? It creates questions. So this book, it really riffs off this like make-believe conflict. And I think for a long time, like putting these things together that were going to make people be like, oh my God, what's that? That was like really my jam. And that's like what I like to make art about. I would love to talk about vaginas all day and show you all my vagina drawings, but I want to get back to this map for a minute, and this idea of conflicting layers in spaces. Like I was saying earlier, when I come to a new place, I'm always trying to answer this question of like, where am I? And my curiosity about this got really intense during 2020 when we were all locked down. Here in San Francisco, I'm not sure if everybody in this room was here during that time, but it was pretty intense. We couldn't go out. Like, you really just could not do anything. No restaurants, no hanging out. There was this real like feeling of fear everywhere. So all I did was walk through the city. I left my house and I would just walk. And I walked across San Francisco to different neighborhoods. And I discovered all of these stairways that go throughout the city. They were new to me and super exciting. I got a hold of this book called Stairway Walks in San Francisco by Ada Bakalinsky. She was this older woman who just like loved to walk, and she loved learning about the history of all the neighborhoods in San Francisco. Unfortunately, she died last year. She was 101. But her book is super cool. She did all these drawings of like all the neighborhoods and these little lines or all the stairways that you can go through. And I've done them all. I love this book. It really kind of got me through the pandemic. And I take people on these like hikes to show them all these things that I learned about the neighborhoods. So this kind of really saved me. On these hikes, the city became new to me. I lived in San Francisco on and off for the past like 24 years. I've only lived in the Mission and the Lower Haight. So places like the East Bernal Heights stairways, this is one of them, became really new to me. And like any tourist, I started taking a lot of pictures, whether they were good or bad. I just started taking pictures. And I became enamored with these stories behind the homes and the stairways and the gardens and everything I was seeing. I wanted to know everything about where I was, especially about this place where I go to all the time. This is the Joy Stairway in East Bernal Heights. Does anybody live in East Bernal Heights or Bernal Heights around here? Yeah, just one person? Okay, this is a gorgeous neighborhood. So this is the Joy Stairway. It has a name. All the houses on there have addresses that are called like 14 Joy or 25 Joy. So if you want to go home, you have to park and then you have to walk up this stairway, which is pretty steep, and get to your house. And the postman has to like trudge up there to get to like 25 Joy or whatever. So these pandemic hikes that I went on and I discovered these places like this are really what got me started reading more books and looking at websites about local history. Like the Joy Stairway. This is that same stairway in the early 1980s before East Bernal Heights was more developed. And I learned in my research that living in Bernal Heights, which is really not too far from here, was considered rural life. Like, can you imagine any place in San Francisco looking rural? Like, it's so dense, right? So yeah, in the 60s, it was considered rural life. And I also learned that before then, decades before Bernal Heights and all of us were in the United States, before the US took San Francisco from Mexico, all of Bernal Heights and the surrounding areas, Potrero, Mission, were part of a Mexican land grant. So Mexico gave land to this guy, and his name was Jose Cornelio Bernal. And that's why, obviously, it's called Bernal Heights. So more than just like learning about these historical plot points, going on these hikes, I gained a sense of my context within these historical plot points. And I started seeing myself as like more of this kind of weird, random European interloper, right? Like my parents came from Europe and I grew up on the East Coast and I came out here like so many of you and so many people to do something new, right? That's what the West Coast is all about. And I just felt like part of a larger story. And in taking these photos, while I was having these thoughts, I was like developing more of a sense of who I was in this place and in this time. But some stories that make a place, they're not in the past, right? They're happening now. They're happening all around us right here. And in 2020, this thought, right, it became really alive for me and it inspired me to start taking more pictures like this one, to think about the infinite number of stories that you can see evidence of in just one photo. These stories weave between each other, between centuries, decades, geographies, historical building permit timelines, all kinds of things, cultures. And I realized more and more I was taking these photos to help me know where I was in the middle of all that. I took this photo on Mission Street because what you see here is just so ordinary for the Mission neighborhood. This guy is selling ice cream while people walk by. It's pretty ordinary. But I had this sense that this picture, and really all pictures, really there's like 1,000 stories in every picture if you just like look really hard. So on first glance, this seems so simple, and depending on who you are, you could interpret this street vendor guy as, like, oh, it's quaint. The mere dollars that he makes is just like kind of how things are in the Mission. And I didn't really like that interpretation when I thought of it. So acknowledging the potential for that interpretation, I just had to add a layer with something that would interrupt that and create some conflict. So I added what I thought looked like a rich yoga lady. Ha! And then I added a tech dude, right? Or what we think of as a stereotypical tech dude. And like these layers, right, for that photo, they're kind of interesting and critical and like class conscious and pretty real for that neighborhood. But I, took some minutes to think about it, and I was like, oh my God, I'm like less mad at the world now. And this composition that I made with my layers is a little too reductive. How do I know that every white passing yoga lady on mission is rich, right? I don't know that. And how do I know that the street vendor, I don't know what his situation is. Maybe he does yoga, I don't know about his life. And these questions got me thinking about the stories of people I know in San Francisco, my own stories, the news, what I read about history, not stereotypes. And I started integrating those photos in a more complicated way than cake plus apocalypse or, gay men plus vaginas. And I crystallized the story of this image even further based on people I know. In my mind, the yogi, she's not a rich lady. She's my friend who was brought here from Guatemala by her mom. She grew up in the mission. She went to Mission High. She busted her butt, put herself through school. She has a PhD. She's got a buttload of student loans, and that's her. And she's walking past a street vendor. Maybe he's also from Guatemala. I don't know, but he's maybe a guy from her generation. And in my drawing, these people, they're from the same place, and now they're here, and their stories touch. And that dude in the middle, the tech dude, he's a real person. I used to work with him at a tech company. He lives at a co-op at 20th Street and Mission. He got laid off, and now he runs ecstatic dance parties. And that's real. Here's the beginning of another coloring book page. This is a house I walked by on Treat Avenue, built in 1900. I actually met somebody here named Nikki who lives right near this house, which is super awesome. Got to talk to him about that. So in the years before San Francisco was built, it was surrounded by forests. And as the Industrial Revolution kind of ramped up, people got the tools to turn the forest wood into 2x4s. And so people created these new house framing practices and standardized the sizes of lumber. And homes started getting more complicated facades and roof lines like this. And once they were built, all these houses had these kinds of crazy, complicated, coverings of machined trim. And for that time, that was new. So basically, like at the time, the captains of industry figured out a new way to do something. And so they did it. They did it because they could, and because people like what's new and what's exciting. So this type of Victorian architecture is called stick because it's decorated with these new machine-cut sticks. Well, I didn't know any of this when I took this picture. I was just like, oh, look at this quaint Victorian. Oh, it's like so Hallmark. I love it. It's beautiful. It's so quintessential. And then I was like, well, that's nice. How can I be mad about this picture? We can't have nice things. So I had to create this conflict and put something in a layer that would throw it off. So I added this as a Cybertruck, right? Cybertrucks are now all around the mission. And, sorry if anybody here has one, whatever. They just, they just seem so discordant with everything in the place where I live, right? It's this beautiful Victorian home, and then bam, Cybertruck. And really discordant with anything that anyone thinks is beautiful, as far as I know. And also they just they feel so arrogant, and they're kind of menacing, right? Like there's something human about them. So, it's just especially menacing in front of this welcoming home. But then I had this feeling of well, maybe this conflict, that I'm mapping or layering onto this is just too easy, right? I know these two things look like they don't go together, but I had this underlying feeling of well, maybe they do. So I did some research on the Cybertruck, and it turns out that those stainless steel panels, that rust, by the way, when they get wet, they can't be made of normal car parts. They're laser cut, also a newer technique developed in the 60s. And they're bent along the straight line. So Tesla invented their own manufacturing process called air bending, which shapes the steel with high pressure without actually touching the surface. So basically Elon Musk made this because he could, just like those 19th century developers, right, who put machine-cut trim on Victorian homes. They did it because they wanted to wow people and because they could. And of course, Tesla is originally a Silicon Valley company, so to see one here in the Mission, where I live, is just yet another piece of evidence of how Tesla's Silicon Valley story influences the character of the Mission, which, by the way, is just 23 miles away from the original Tesla office, which is crazy to think about because now Teslas are all over the world. And there's one last thing about this image and the idea that these two layers conflict with one another, and that's that one of the few ways anyone can afford to keep up or rehab one of these ancient Victorian homes is to work in tech or derive an income somehow from technology in that industry. So these two objects are potentially connected in this other way. So while I started playing out with layers that seemed in conflict with one another, they now feel like they're all kind of part of the same layer. The story of the Cybertruck and the story of San Francisco's Victorian architecture, they touch each other, and in my neighborhood, in ways that I haven't really discovered yet. Conflict is inevitable, but in going on my hikes and learning about where I live, I've started to question what layers are really in conflict. So today, I leave you with this question. What layers can you merge? Thank you.